poor corporate culture can create many risks for companies. This is because corporate culture sits at the heart of how a company operates on a day-to-day basis. It sets the tone for what is acceptable corporate behaviour, and it can influence the decisions that a company makes, including its attitude to risk and its compliance with legal and regulatory obligations. So the risks are very straightforwardly, it can result in a breach of legal and regulatory obligations. So for example, bribery, money laundering, sexual harassment, these types of offences. And these types of offences can have a very significant reputational effect on the company and, for example, can lead to the share price falling. And this is the typical Matt Levine, everything is securities fraud. A bad thing happens, the company doesn't tell the shareholders about it, the share price drops, and the shareholders sue. It can also create longer-term reputational damage to the company's brand, to its ability to retain talent, and to its long-term value and prospects in the case of a private company if it were to be sold, for example.
So how are we seeing employers deal with workplace culture issues? There's still a need to respond to specific instances where they occur. So for example, in relation to reports of sexual harassment or other whistleblowing reports. And we continue to help clients with their investigations into those where that's appropriate. But we're seeing companies taking a more proactive approach. And that's partly in response to specific legal obligations. So for example, in the UK and in Australia, the need to take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace, and the need to risk assess those. And some of those steps might be quite broad-ranging. So for example, thinking about board diversity as a way to prevent groupthink. There are also specific obligations from a corporate governance perspective. So thinking about monitoring and assessing whether or not the desired culture has been embedded. There are also specific regulatory and legislative frameworks that needs to be followed and increasingly will need to be engaged with. So for example, the EU Pay Transparency Directive, the EU AI Act, CSRD, CSDDD, and other obligations, and the general regulatory framework in relation to non-financial misconduct. So how are we seeing employers really work to systematise their approach to workplace governance? We're seeing that mostly they'd start from one specific incident and think, okay, are there trends and learnings that we can draw from that and extrapolate more broadly? They might want to test, for example, whether those trends do apply by doing a further desktop review, for example, a global workplace survey around the ethical compliance culture. They may then want to draw out the learnings from that and talk within particular focus groups to see what trends emerge. They then may want to have a system which actually tracks and maps those trends across the organisation going forward, increasingly thinking about how they can use AI to do that. They then want to do a gap analysis of whether their existing governance framework does actually address the things that they found to remediate that. So that might be, for example, in relation to the policies they've got for incentivisation, for reward, risk, and accountability, and how the senior leadership are going to take that forward, and how they're going to cascade that so that translates into day-to-day behaviours within the organisation, which means that they're potentially reducing the number of incidents going forward and having that compliance culture that they're driving for. They'll continue to monitor and assess that, and then where appropriate, they might even disclose and report on that depending on their obligations. And we're continuing to work with our clients in terms of those approaches.
So regulators are interested in culture because they see it as a key contributor in cases where there is sometimes misconduct or other bad outcomes. And so one way of getting a better sense of what companies are doing on culture is to increase the reporting requirements. So for example, in the UK, the updates to the recent Corporate Governance Code include a new requirement to embed the desired culture and to report on how this has been embedded. The FRC looks at reporting of culture and has identified this as an area where it is generally not particularly strong. They would like companies to provide more detail of how the board is actually taking steps to promote the desired culture, and they would like to understand more about the actions that the board have taken during the year to identify potential issues with the culture and to require management to take steps to address those issues and what those are.
So the three key things that boards should be looking out for on workplace culture. First, navigating divergent views and approaches in relation to DEI and working out what for their company or their portfolio is the best approach, taking into account their sector, regulatory focus, and also what their stakeholders expect of them. Second, making sure that they've got the appropriate management information for them to be able to draw together cultural risk across the piece and really work towards the appropriate outcomes for their organisation. Third, as a result of those first two steps, hopefully seeing the benefit of a coherent and compliant picture on culture, whatever the appropriate culture is for their organisation.